Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Michelle Charlton from Skills Education. Thanks for joining us. If this is your second time back for our 10-part series on RPL with Deb Carr, thank you and welcome back. If this is your first time on a Skills Education session, welcome and thank you for coming along to the network that's supporting presenters who support vet practitioners. Now, while everyone's getting settled, I'll run through our housekeeping spiel for you. It's really quick. If you were in the waiting room, you might have seen some slides giving you some directions about how we'll use the technology today. We're using the chat window predominantly for engagement. So if you want to put in some questions or shout outs, drop them into the chat. Deb has also provided some handouts for today's session. So if you go across the tabs to the top right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the handouts there loaded. You can download them onto your computer straight away. Now, I'll also let you know that today's session is being recorded. So once the live session is finished, probably within about 24 hours, we'll get an email from the system notifying us that the recording is available to view. And for those of us who can't join the live session and they will be looking at the recording, they'll have gone to the Better portal, logged in through there. Anyone who's paid and registered can do it that way. At the end of the session, you'll also get an email asking for feedback. Now, that's a really important email, not only because our presenters love hearing your feedback about how the sessions went, but that's the email that triggers your PD record. So keep an eye out for that. It is anonymous. You can submit a blank form, but as I said, the feedback is always well received. So that's what you need to do to get your PD record. And we just want to give a big shout out to the Better team who supply the technology for the skills education webinars and make it so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Now, all of that admin out of the way, I can see that we've got some people saying hi in the chat, and that's fantastic. Deb is our special guest here today. She's going to be continuing, as I said, her 10-session series on 10 tips for doing RPL better. And last session, we heard about the implications of that often heard phrase, it's just easier to do the course, and how competent and experienced RPL staff could be a really good decision for RTOs. Today, Deb's going to take us a little bit further through her research and give us some ideas on how RTOs can teach RPL to help candidates move through that process a little more smoothly. Now, Deb is an expert in this area. She's just finished her Masters of Education Global Learning, where her thesis was on the RPL candidate, a neglected stakeholder. So given that RPL is a mandatory requirement for all RTOs, Deb's series absolutely promises to provide valuable insights into ways that this mandatory process can be done better or in different ways. So we're so lucky to have Deb along for the Skills Education series and to be sharing our expertise. I'm going to hand over to her now. Thank you, Deb, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Hey, guys, I'm recognising some names in the audience. Thanks for joining us today. So these sessions are for training managers and RPL practitioners that seek to do RPL better. Today, I will first share findings from my research project that are relevant to this topic, and then I'll share pre-recorded interviews with our guests, Sandy McCoy and Lisa Jeffrey from the public sector, sharing good practice around empowering RPL candidates. A short summary of the research project is outlined in your handouts. Sandy is in our audience today and welcomes questions. A note for our international audience, context is in the Australian vet system. RPL assesses informal learning as defined in our Australian qualification framework. I've conducted this research, thanks Michelle, as she mentioned, as part of my Masters in Education at Charles Darwin University, plug for them, which included an international study tour. My current day job is with Vet Assess, where I'm privileged to help other countries build and improve their RPL frameworks. Very exciting. My research revealed many problems associated with practice of RPL. There's no surprises there. As I continue to research, listen and practice, potential solutions are evolving. This 10-part series delivers 10 possible solutions. I make no claim that these are the only solutions, but I think they go a long way to doing RPL better, because it speaks directly to the candidate's experience. We do have systemic problems in Australia with RPL. These sessions recognise, however, that we can do RPL better within the system that we have. Australia's national competency-based RPL framework is envied by many, many countries. The changing nature of work, globalisation, ageing demographics, and the rapid pace of technological advancement drives many nations' imperative for RPL. COVID-19 has placed even more imperative on RPL. Efficient use of skills directly impacts our economy and social fabric, now more than ever. This webinar is to inform your decisions about RPL with evidence and case studies of good practice. This is not a platform to check compliance or technical discussions. We encourage you to share contact details in the pursuit of good RPL practice. So let's go. So stage one of my research, I had a chat with assessors, and this was their insights. 25% of all expressions of difficulties were about not understanding RPL. 7% of all expressions of difficulties were about connecting evidence to the workplace. These assessors are talking about enrolled candidates, usually candidates who have already seen and read through the info kit. In my research, difficulties are defined as things that make RPL hard to accomplish, deal with, or understand, not necessarily insurmountable, and doesn't necessarily cause the candidate to quit. Oh, sorry. Thanks, Michelle. So delving deeper into what exactly don't they understand, we find 16 of 21 assessors said candidates find it difficult to understand what the assessor wants. 14 assessors said candidates do not understand what RPL is. 14 candidates have difficulty understanding the initial RPL information package. 10 assessors said candidates find it difficult to relate to the words in the competency. 9 said candidates realise that RPL is not for them after getting into the process. 4 assessors said candidates find it difficult to gauge how much evidence was enough and erred on the side of more is better, as many of us assessors know. So 14 assessors said candidates find it difficult to make the necessary connections between work experience, skills evidence, the unit of competency, language, and the workplace knowledge. 5 assessors said candidates simply do not have the words to articulate their skills and knowledge or how they come to know what they know. When I spoke with TAE candidates, and they were the research subjects for my study, the difficulty of not understanding RPL was more nuanced, probably because they had the terminology and language to better describe their difficulties. They said they did understand RPL, but were unsure exactly what the assessor wanted. They also described the difficulty of sorting and organising the evidence in a way they thought the assessor wanted. They became particularly confused when there was duplication across units, the evidence went across a number of units, and knowing exactly how much to submit. A candidate said, "If you've got very defined coursework, I know what's required, whereas RPL evidence is a little bit more nebulous." Moreover, there appeared direct correlation between these technical difficulties and flow-on mindset difficulties, such as loss of confidence, resisting the RPL process as valid, feeling professionally questioned, and navigating their own expectations of it being easier. So I want to share with you candidates' responses when I asked if the RPL process required them to learn. Yes, sometimes you don't even know why you're doing it. It's like, this is how it is, how it's done. You just do it and you never go, but why? Yes, well, I think we spend so much time in the workplace and we do things because it's habit. Because this RPL is actually adding value and allowing me to go back and look at theory that I know is in the back of my mind. You know, I feel like I've grown up a bit too in relation to knowledge content. Yes, I hate to say it, but I think I was maybe taking shortcuts because I was working in isolation. Kinda, it just reminded me that about those things and brought them back to my conscious awareness. And more. So yeah, so if there have been any gaps in, it's not necessarily been in my knowledge, it's been in my processes. And you know, it taught me to look at the bigger picture. There's doing the work, and then there's kind of talking about how you did the work, which is just as important in your process and your methodology and your problem-solving capability. I don't think it's new knowledge. I think it's just about reconfirming things that I knew and have maybe slipped off my radar. And it's interesting because you don't know what you don't know. Yes, this RPL has made me improve my practices. I guess I wanted to present this perhaps to start us thinking about the less obvious benefits of RPL. There is a meta-learning aspect to RPL which can be enabled depending on your approach. It's less about mapping, it's more about critical thinking. But also, the same candidates said this. Well, I have to understand how the practice of RPL is structured. I have to learn how to do it. It's less about learning and more about collating. Well, it's using your analytical skills. I certainly have learned how to treat my inbox. Do I need to learn? Needs me to learn to keep better records. No, you're not actually learning material, but you are learning how to respond to questions and how to provide evidence. These reflections are more around learning how to do RPL. Interestingly, some candidates that said, no, it doesn't require me to learn, also said that it improved their practice. So in some way, shape or form, RPL has a transformative impact. So RPL requires translation. There's no argument. A unit of competency is in a language not familiar to many. It requires a number of translations. First, I need to articulate my claim. What can I do and what do I know? From my overall job description to what are my tasks? That in itself is a translation many find difficult. Some jobs are difficult to atomize into tasks. For example, act ethically. Then I need to interpret the unit. This can be with the help of my assessor who puts it in layman's terms. Then I need to translate the unit to my workplace. Sometimes, actually many times, this is not a good fit. Then I need to translate the unit to my particular job. What does that look like in my job, in my previous jobs? Not to mention I have to remember it. What are the tasks? What is my responsibility in those tasks? This is a tricky bit because many people do not know what they know. They don't recognize they have the experience because of the translated language or because they may do it in less formal ways. Then I need to think of possible evidence and hope it all connects with what the assessor wants. Perhaps the question here is who does what interpreting and translating? At what point does it then disempower the candidate in the process? I think there's a sweet spot in the middle which provides for an empowered candidate. I think a solution to the angst candidates experience is to teach them RPL, empower them in the process. I accept that this may be contentious. Perhaps we could teach candidates that RPL is an assessment, but emphasise that it's against a formal matrix, maybe a skills audit, rather than a judgment where failure is possible. Some candidates do think that if they send off their resume, a qualification will return. It is also a foreign thought to some, even assessors, that RPL is an assessment. Evidence must be assessed and conducted with the same rigour as coursework assessment. Number two, we could teach them to become familiar with the unit of competency. We could teach them what evidence is, what's it look like, what are the rules. We could teach them how to connect a unit of competency to workplace tasks. I was chatting with an RTO who primarily helps defence personnel transition to a civilian workforce through RPL. She said personnel do not think in skills. They think in job identity. I drive a tank. I'm a sniper. They do not think in skills such as safety, contingency planning, risk management, concise communication, equipment maintenance, and timeliness. It's not natural for them to think in skills. People think in jobs. 5, we could teach them what are the principles of assessment. Many RTOs do provide this information to candidates in a haphazard sort of way. Many assessors end up doing this as part and parcel of their assessment after enrolment. Perhaps, I'm suggesting, we could be more efficient and teach RPL as a micro-credential, or an online learning activity, or a video scribe, or a quiz, like spot the skills in a video, or matching game between the PCs and the work tasks, or treat it as a job interview with selection criteria. I think it could be a viable solution to confused candidates. So here are some benefits of teaching RPL that you may have picked up already. Some may have opposing views, and I accept that. A process whereby the candidate does not need to map, is a passive candidate, working his job and being observed and assessed without critically understanding what is going on, can be less painful for candidates. Yes, that's true. A friend of mine, she helped her husband do his RPL. She translated the unit for him. He told his work story. She translated it into a succinct explanation. Both of them searched for the evidence. Is there anything wrong here? No, not really. So next, Lisa Jeffrey will share her story with interesting insight. Hi Lisa, how are you going?
Hi Deb, well thank you.
Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
We'll just go straight into it. We've only got 10 minutes. In what ways do you empower candidates in their RPL process?
I think the key point for my RPL candidates is the planning phase that I go through before I meet them. I like to be able to have a good idea of who my candidates are as a vocational expert in my industry area. I have a pretty good idea of what evidence I can expect to see from a candidate who's competent in a qualification that I'm assessing. And equally the proprietary company information that I'm not likely to be able to keep a copy of, or that they're not likely to be able to bring to me, might be something that I need to cite and then return. And that upfront planning gives me an opportunity to create the preparedness that I need so they can be completely transparent with the candidate when they come to me seeking RPL, so that I can set them up to succeed and give them a really good picture of what it is they're in for. I also use it to try and create a really
Sorry, guys. Are people getting an echo? Hi, Lisa. How are you going?
Hi, Deb. Well, thank you.
Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
We'll just go straight into it. We've only got 10 minutes. In what ways do you empower candidates in their RPL process?
I think the key point for my RPL candidates is the planning phase that I go through before I meet them. I like to be able to have a good idea of who my candidates are as a vocational expert in my industry area. I have a pretty good idea of what evidence I can expect to see from a candidate who's competent in a qualification that I'm assessing, and equally the proprietary company information that I'm not likely to be able to keep a copy of, or that they're not likely to be able to bring to me, might be something that I need to cite and then return. And that upfront planning gives me an opportunity to create the preparedness that I need, so they can be completely transparent with the candidate when they come to me seeking RPL, so that I can set them up to succeed and give them a really good picture of what it is they're in for. I also use it to try and create a really good structured document that can help guide them when they're away from me. So if I give them something to use as a tool, that it works for them and takes them through the journey while they're going through this RPL process. The document has to be set up well enough so that it asks them what they need to hear rather than telling them what I want to say. So the unit of competency might have a series of content that I need them to address, but they're not going to be able to translate that into what their work tasks look like. So I shape the document so that they can translate what they've got to share to me, rather than trying to interpret what it is I'm after out of the unit of competency.
So you're saying that one way that you empower the candidates is help prepare them before enrolment and payment, so they know what their expectations are, which in my research was a big thing. Inaccurate expectations was a precursor to dropping out.
Yeah, absolutely.
What area of RPL do you find that candidates just simply do not get?
Yeah, and that's probably the key point, is trying to translate what it is I want in comparison to what it is they do, their typical work tasks, to show how they are a competent person. Yeah. So if I give them curriculum speak, vet speak, technical jargon that isn't industry specific, they probably aren't going to be able to translate that back to what it is they do. And in the end, they'll just give up and say, I can't be bothered. It's important that I try and meet them where they are and make it easy for them to be able to show me what they know, because that's the point of the whole process, rather than asking them to learn what I know as an assessor.
Yeah, you were telling me earlier about an example of when you did an RPL that the candidates didn't go through that a feeling of anxiety and disconnect. That was quite a relatively easy process for them.
Yeah. So I was fortunate. I had a few candidates a couple of years ago, and they were very experienced practitioners in the industry, and they needed RPL for licensed outcomes, and they were quite qualified for it, but the qualifications they had weren't current anymore, so they needed to update their skills and knowledge. And I found that it was on reflection, I looked at the way that I conducted the RPL. It was very assessor driven. I took the burden of the responsibility of managing the journey, and I simply went to their workplace and found all the evidence as they were working in real time. I think there was some knowledge evidence that I quizzed them about orally, but the rest I was able to just extract from their office, whether it be documentation that I looked at, again, that proprietary information that I couldn't take off site, that was clients, documents and design content. if I wanted to see them using the software, or if I wanted to see how they did their file management, I could ask them to show me in real time in the office. So it was a really valid and convenient and efficient way to assess a big qualification in a very short period of time. And the burden of translating that journey was really mine under those circumstances. So it was really satisfying for these executive RPL candidates who, you know, time is money, and they really appreciated that efficiency. But I don't think they learned anything about themselves in the process.
Yeah, that's interesting. So they didn't have to make those connections between a unit, that kind of speak, and the skills, and their tasks and their workplace tasks.
No, so I did all that for them.
Yeah, and that does reduce anxiety and angst, and is a positive for the candidate and the assessor, and perhaps also the supervisor. Do you think then, in the context of teaching RPL that we've talked about in this unit around having the candidate actually understand RPL and being able to learn how to make those connections, do you think it would have been beneficial in this circumstance to teach RPL for them? Why?
Yeah, I do. I think that there was a little bit of a lost opportunity there around these particular candidates learning what RPL was, mostly because they have staff and they're a design thinking industry, and they could very well have used the RPL process and the reflective nature of the RPL process to learn something about themselves and the way they do their work, to help them formulate and articulate that to the staff that they mentor and coach. They have young design graduates coming through regularly, and most of those graduates are new to the design industry, and getting insights from experienced practitioners about how they do their jobs is really insightful. So having had, if I had have asked them to reflect a little bit on how they do their work, then they would have that in their minds then to be able to relay that onto somebody else. I think having the opportunity to get them to know the RPL process might have also been beneficial, because they would then pass that valuable knowledge on to others, not necessarily just their staff, but the wider community, because the word of mouth encouragement for people to go out and go looking for RPL opportunities can also be helpful as well. So they have the opportunity to then pass it forward and set people up for success themselves. It would have been a bit more of an engaging two-way interaction with the candidates that I did, and I perhaps would have gained some benefit from them being able to articulate that at the time. But because it was so assessor-driven, it was pretty much just me looking at them and gathering the evidence. It would have been good.
Yeah, there's one, absolutely, it's horses for courses as well. One of the things that I was thinking, if we don't empower the candidate to understand the RPL process, what happens when we come back with RPL not granted?
Yeah, so I would have been gazumped under those circumstances. I would really have been stuck. I would have had to have kept the assessor-driven modality, because that's what I had already set up, and to be able to switch to a little bit of gap training, or to switch to a little bit of reflective portfolio evidence gathering, would have been really, really challenging, because I had already set the candidates' expectations up that that's the way it was going to go and everything was going to be fine. I was fortunate that my prediction that they would be granted RPL came true, because I knew that they had long history in the industry and their competency was fairly assured. But if there was any doubt, then I would have been in trouble.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. When we empower them in their process, they're able to appeal and say, well, actually, no, you've missed this, or B, accept the judgment in a kind of a skills audit approach, rather than a skills assessment pass-fail approach.
No, that's really, really true. Absolutely.
And I never thought about how it empowers them to actually teach as well. It gives them those words to be able to identify what they're looking for and articulate it, what they're looking for in their staff. That's good pickup.
And I think you've mentioned in the past when we've been talking that it gives them a bit of an idea of where they're at. So even though the credential might be something that they knew that they were able to achieve, it does validate that they really
Yeah.
did achieve it. They really do hit those benchmarks.
Well,
So
one of my
it's good
candidates,
for them to check in.
she was a trainer at a mine site, and she just did, because she's by herself, she doesn't have colleagues to kind of nut it out. She did it as a way to just check that she was on the right path and doing it correctly at industry standards. And she said to me, well, actually, Deb, I'm way above the baseline, and this has really validated the way that I do that. So it was reflective practice, and it was a good outcome. It was, I'm good at what I do, and I'm actually doing best practice.
Yeah, and my candidates may have taken that reflection, but I didn't really hear about it.
Yeah.
So that it was kind of lost there in the conversation.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. They got the credential, but they didn't necessarily get any extra learning out of the process.
Yeah, there's lots of flow-on other benefits in the process, particularly when it's done in a critical thinking kind of way.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for your time very much. Thank you, Lisa.
My pleasure, Deb, anytime.
Bye to beautiful sunny Northern Territory.
See you.
Bye. Thanks, Lisa. So if you have any questions in regards to that different sort of approach, I'm really interested to hear what you think about that. So we're going to play a Sandy now. This interview goes for 18 minutes. Okay, thanks for joining me, Sandy.
You're welcome.
So we're just going to go into a couple of things from your experience. What is it, or are there people in your experience that just don't get RPL?
Yes, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have. Over time, as qualifications and standards and processes have changed, and they have changed dramatically over the time, I don't think necessarily the understanding out there in the industry has changed along with that. And as we're getting more regulation and processes around vocational education and training, we need to make those efforts to ensure that we're keeping the core people that are involved in this, which is in the majority your employers in your industry, understanding as to what is happening in RPL practices. So I think when you look at the way people do their work and the way that people operate in their jobs and in their industries, and the levels of connection, like we're just looking now that industry has become such an international market now, and the competition is international in most industries, that the old person next door running a business, or the family business as such, everything's changed so much over the last 5 or 10 years as such. And so with that, what's also changed is the qualifications and the expectations of people out there in work. So if you look back at the initial qualifications when training packages came out, and how people did their job 15, 20 years ago, to what they're expected to do today, to obtain a qualification, to work in an industry, to be able to change jobs, to be able to progress up, the skills are very different. And so sometimes the employer's expectations of what people need to do in their job vary, but also their understanding of what the qualifications mean, and then the RPL assessment process associated to that. There's been a lot of change in that as well.
So it's you're speaking about employers actually not understanding the RPL process. Okay.
Because they're the core person in the industry, really. They're the people that are running the businesses. It doesn't matter which area or industry it's in. They're the people that are running the businesses, producing the goods and services, employing the staff, and implementing their industry standards. And those standards, as we said, qualifications were introduced to increase or improve and raise the standards out there in industry. and whether they have or not, the process that goes with that now is the qualifications needed to do that. And if the employers don't understand what's involved in the qualification itself and in competency-based training, you still have a lot of the more trades-based people that think it's that apprenticeship time-served process rather than actual skills, knowledge, development and application.
Yeah.
It's a very different world of expectation there.
Yeah.
And then if you educate the employers, obviously they're going to educate their employees.
Well, yeah, that came out in my study. The expectations of the workplace and the employer dynamics really do transpire as additional challenges for the candidates, because you've been doing it for 30 years, just go get the qualification. So how might we be able to educate employers and teach them?
Well, I think that's the key thing, that not only have we had the raising of the standards in the qualifications and to reflect the changing standards in the industry, we've got such a mobile workforce. That was the other reason that competency-based assessment and standardised qualifications and all of that came in. So you've got that real diversity in the workforce and that flexibility and people moving around. But as we know in VET, our programs and qualifications and our training and assessment practices need to be based on industry consultation and industry support. And that is your way of ensuring that not only are we getting their feedback into our programs, but they are building their understanding of competency-based training and vocational education and training as well. So it is about going out and working in industry and maintaining your currency of practice as a trainer and assessor, but it's also about bringing industry into our world, into our educational industry, and using their expertise and building them up as experts in their industry and to share that knowledge, but take that opportunity to explain to them how that transfers into the educational world as well, and what our expectations are.
So during an RPL process, what would that look like?
Well, there's quite a few strategies that we have in RPL. So we know that we have to have the employer, be it through third-party reports or be it through the PQS requirements of having the conversation with the employer. But it's really about building up that understanding of their expertise and their lending of their expertise to the experience of the students. So it's about that reciprocity there, that what we need from you is your confirmation on the skills and knowledge that your candidate demonstrates on a day-to-day work, in the day-to-day workplace, and supporting the candidate to say that. But in order to do that, the employer needs to know what we're looking for, and it's about taking that opportunity to, as we said, to educate them. So I give the example that we give them an overarching sort of third-party report sort of process that says, these are the sorts of skills and knowledge that your industry has determined is the expectation of your students or your employees. And we'll need to have this conversation with you, and we'll go through and we'll assess the candidate and see that this candidate has got the skills and knowledge and can demonstrate the application of them and the transferability of them. But this is what we're wanting you to confirm, that this is what the person needs. So if you have that conversation, and it can be in the way that you build your assessment tool as well. It's getting their understanding and their expectations as well at the same time as showing them what the industry standard looks like. And it's just taking those opportunities, but doing it in a way that's appreciating their expertise. So once you've assessed the student, like once you've gone through the process and explained it to them, but also once you've assessed, can you confirm and can you give us other examples? And so that's where they understand what we're looking for and how we are valuing their opinion at that time.
Yeah, interesting take on teaching RPL. And a lot of employers have been out of the educational aspect of their job for many years, and things, as you said, have come more knowledge-based. Their business may become international. It's more complex, interdisciplinary. So and our standards and our qualifications have followed suit, and so they may be a lot more complex than the employer realises.
And I think it's the premise of understanding the difference between not just being able to do a task or do a job, but understanding why you do that way. And that's where I've had a lot of conversations around, nearly every unit that you teach now, it's, or that you assess, I should say, is around following organisational policies and procedures. And it's often not being able to do the task, it's being able to know how to find out how to do the task, who to talk to, and it's making sure that the business and the industry have those processes in place. And that can be really challenging sometimes. And it's taking the opportunity to, as I said, educate the industry, but to the reciprocity in that is, well, let's help you establish these systems in your business to support your employees, to support their assessment. So it's a learning process for everyone in that particular thing, but it's also rewarding them for systems that they've got in place, and processes that they've already got in place.
We certainly found that out in the first session too, around some childcare centres. So what inherently is, from a candidate's perspective, the biggest thing that they just don't get about RPL?
I think the biggest challenge is that most people don't understand that RPL is an assessment process. It's the assessment only pathway. And secondly to that is the fact of what I just mentioned before, is the difference between doing a job and being assessed as competent to do the job. So it's that whole process that needs to be explained really clearly to a candidate, so as not to bamboozle them or confuse them or overwhelm them. And that is often what happens. It's too much information at once. But at the same time, a genuine RPL candidate, someone who believes they are capable and competent in their particular field of work, should have a certain element of understanding of what's involved. But you've got to, just like we were saying with the employers, you've got to sell it to them in a way that is around building up and recognising their expertise, rather than focusing on the assessment process and seeing it from an assessment perspective. But it's about making sure that that process is in the same way quite clear, that they are aware that they are going to have to demonstrate their understanding of what they do and how they do and why they do particular things. They're going to have to produce, generate or provide evidence to support the demonstration of that as well.
And do you think they understand what evidence may be? Like, do I get
not
paper,
at all.
how much, what's it going to look like, how do I collate it?
Yes, and that's where it's like any learning experience. You've got to scaffold it for the students. Just because they're saying that they believe that they're competent in that particular industry and workforce, it doesn't mean that they truly understand that assessment process at this stage. And like I said, you don't want to confuse them and overwhelm them and have it too process driven, because that just, you lose people that way. And that's where we hear all of those statements around, it's just easier to come in and do the training.
Yeah.
And it's even sadder when that's said by the assessor. But I think that's the reality of it. If RPL is supposed to be, money for jam, as they say, and the quickest and easiest way to the qualification, if you are genuinely competent, and that's what we're wanting, is to move people through quickly and more succinctly, because they don't have to wade through that training. They already got that. But that's where we have to make the process explicit, transparent, and supportive of them as well. So if I can, I'll give the example of what we do. We have a pre-enrollment sort of process, and it's around having a very brief but detailed, dare I say, I'll explain how in a minute, conversation with the candidate, because they make their application and it says, hey, I want to do RPL for this qualification. So we then break it down roughly unit by unit, but it might be concept by concept. And an assessor who's an expert in that particular industry and area will know the key pieces of evidence. And like you said, evidence can be able to explain what they're doing, show how they've done it somewhere in some time and frame. But we talk about the different types of evidence. It can be conversations, it can be portfolio evidence, it can be demonstrated in any variety of ways. But we have that conversation with them, as the assessor should know what are the key types and pieces of evidence or answers to questions or things that they would be able to provide that would show that they're a genuine candidate for RPL. And if someone can answer or provide those instant responses pretty quickly to just a couple of questions per unit or qualification or skill set or whatever, however the assessor and the expert wants to clump it together, that you go, yeah, okay, you're going to be pretty good with that particular unit. And if there's other units where they really don't know a lot, well, then you're just identifying their training pathway at this stage. These are going to be RPL, these are going to be credit transfer, these are going to be training pathway. And that just gives the students straight away a structure of where they're going. And then the next step is, once you get them enrolled and work through that process, then you break it down to the next level for them. Okay, these are the sorts of questions that you're going to have to answer. This is the sorts of evidence that I need to see. Do you have that available? Could you create that with me? And you really want to do it in that way of giving them the opportunity to shine. This is their chance to really show that they are competent and capable in their industry and in that particular area that they're looking to get recognition of prior learning for. And it's about guiding them through those processes, as you said, of how to collect or what evidence that they could provide. And it's helping them make those connections. When we look at the dimensions of competency, it's getting them to understand. I think that comes back to, not only do they not understand RPL and that it's an assessment process, but they don't generally understand what competency means. It's not just being able to do the task. It's being able to demonstrate all of the different task skills. It's being able to manage all of those tasks together to get the job done, and the job is the unit of competency. And this is where we can start to break down a lot of that language for them as well. But then they have to be able to explain why and how and where and when they do those tasks and manage those tasks following organisational procedures. Where does the legislative knowledge come into it? Where do the teamwork and the organisational skills come into that? And then lastly, but most importantly, and I think this is the concept with RPL, is being able to transfer those skills and problem solve with those skills and extend on those skills. And so if you've got a really good grounding in the assessment process, then you can then go to the next unit and the next process and build.
And it's something that they get used to doing, and so they can do it again. And so do you think that we can teach someone to tease out the skills that beside each task, so we can teach them to do that themselves?
I think that's the role of the assessor. The assessor is to document the evidence and make the judgment, but in doing that, you've got to teach the candidate how to present the evidence to you and how to make those connections themselves.
I think it's step number one first. They've got to be able to make those connections first, and then think about what evidence can prove that.
Yeah, exactly. So so that's where you have those initial conversations about what units you're going to do. And then when you get into those units, you look at, well, this is the skills and knowledge that you need to demonstrate. What evidence have you got that will demonstrate that? From your current and existing, or and if you don't have that, how can you create it? But then it's also, you don't want to go down the rabbit hole of unit by unit by unit by unit, because that is where it is an assessment process rather than a genuine recognition of prior learning. Because you don't go to work and be occupationally healthy and safe today and be culturally respectful tomorrow. You know, you do the job. So you're working at as the assessor, you're working at two levels, because you're working at the qualification or the cluster or the skill set sort of level. But for the student, they're doing the job. They're doing this part of the job today. And you're getting them to make that connection between these individual tasks that they do and why and how to do them, to then take it to the next level of, getting the job done and understanding that at the job level as well.
I'm going to have to wrap it up there. Sorry, Sandy. So just time there. We looked at some of the components that we can teach them would be around the concept of competency. That RPL is an assessment process that they need to explain what they do and why they do it, and to teach them to make those connections between the unit of competency and their work tasks.
Their jobs, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Thanks, Sandy. It's interesting. I was looking at some of those comments while that was being shown. Paper-driven, yeah, we need to start being more flexible in our assessment approach, and we look at that at a later webinar. And something I saw there, doing the job, does that mean that I'm competent? I don't know. We all know people that we think are not competent at their job. If you've ever heard of the Peters principle, where someone gets promoted to a point where they are not competent in their job that they've been promoted to. So, a job description is not in itself a valid piece of evidence. There's two distinct skills here, I think, that we've explored, and that's the skill to do RPL, as well as the skills and the knowledge that they're, the competency that they're seeking recognition for. Did anyone want to put down any comments around your thoughts about whose responsibility is it to make those connections to work? And where is that balance between empowerment and being overwhelmed? Does anybody have a question for Sandy at all? Nope. Yeah. Yeah. The assessor does need to guide. It's your world. It's also your responsibility to motivate, reassure, be there when they ask questions. And that's a webinar that's coming up, just to be there, because they know their job. They know the skills. They're at the coalface. They know the difficulties. It's about building up their confidence, I think, to be able to, or maintaining their confidence, because they always come to the process with an amount of confidence because they're making a claim. So it's kind of our job not to erode that. What do you think, Michelle?
It's a hard one, isn't it? Because as an assessor, you do have obligations. As an assessor, under the standards, it's up to you. Like the rules of evidence is the assessor is assured that the evidence is authentic, it's valid, it's current, and sufficient evidence that's there. But and I think your clips with your guests put it out really nicely when they explain that there's just such variable when you go into the workplace in real time. It's authentic, but then someone has to marry all of that back to the unit of competency requirements. And this is still assessment. And I think that point's been made really clear in today's session. And a lot of people have the misunderstanding or the misinterpretation that this is RPL, this is quick. Just come in, I'll answer a few questions, I'll show you my resume, you can mark me off. And that's not how it's done according to meet those particular rules of evidence. And as the assessor, that there is that really fine balance to achieve to make sure that you are assured that what you're being presented with is going to meet all the compliance requirements without scaring away the candidate. And in my own experience, there was a a time when I wanted to apply for RPL on a couple of different qualifications, and I just got so frustrated with the process. I was like, I know how to do this. Here's my stuff.
Yeah.
And
believe me.
And I am also an assessor, but because the roles were switched over, I lost patience with it all. So that insight to my own experience makes me think, well, of course, if I got frustrated as a qualified assessor, imagine how the poor old candidate who has no idea potentially of our vet convolutions, how are they going to feel? So it's a really interesting discussion that's come out of today about how do you make sure you keep the ball rolling? How do you make sure that all of that evidence coming back from the candidate is viable evidence for the pool, but you're not scaring them off?
Joanne made the comment there that often the RPL I see is something the employer wants based on regulatory changes or sometimes their tender applications, but the employee sees it as a nuisance on top of their workload. And they're sent off to the RTO, just go get that. And sometimes our own industry is one of the worst for that, particularly when there's a skill shortage around for trainers and assessors. We want to rush our trainers and assessors through their training. Then they come back and we wonder why they can't do their TASs. So we need to, I think, perhaps as an industry, we need to value RPL ourselves.
It's an interesting point that you raised, Deb, and very early in the piece you did mention the coronavirus. I mean, I don't think we go anywhere at the moment without the virus coming up, but that has really shone a spotlight on this issue, because you're absolutely right that the whole economy has been forced into a hibernation of sorts. People have been paused in their employment. Some people have been paused in their employment. Whether or not they go back to the same job waits to be seen, because the employer may not be there, or that the person might have said, well, this is a prime opportunity for me to switch careers. And there's going to be job shortages all over the place. So the pressure and the discussion has been around, now more than ever, we need RPL. But have we got an RPL process that we need more than ever?
No. And it's been a little bit of a disappointment for me that the Australian government hasn't actually used the word RPL in transitioning displaced workers, because those skills, from example, my sister does recruitment, and she's recruiting to mines, and they needed cleaners. So the airport industry were putting off cleaners. Here's cleaners that are being cleaning to a standard, and here's a mine site that need cleaners. The skills are the same, the context is completely different.
So then that opens the door to one of your earlier points around the language of skills. I'm a cleaner in the aviation industry is not the same as I'm a cleaner on a mine site, but I'm a cleaner, I clean to this standard is transferable. And I wonder, Deb, whether or not the Australian government knows the term RPL. I have been getting tongue-tied, RTO and RPL all day. They talk about reskilling or skills retraining, but perhaps there's a bit of you've identified maybe a knowledge gap in some of our polys around the assessment-only pathway, that transfer of skills arrangement.
There's a suspicion from funding bodies of RPL, unfortunately, because as Carmel said before, a lot of the problem that she's saying is that candidates that have previously undertaken RPL process, usually a number of years ago, with an RTO that didn't follow a rigorous process, they have their expectation for a tick and flick. And I haven't been around for longer than 12 years, but from what I've read, the process wasn't as rigorous before, and perhaps there was valid suspicion towards RPL. But now it is very much more rigorous, and some people come to the process with expectations of it being easy, 50-50. Lots of people come to the process expecting it to be horribly hard. It depends on who they've talked about it, because RPL is one of the biggest barriers to RPL across the nation is the lack of awareness, and that's been the same since a study in 2009. It is a lack of awareness of RPL. People that come to this process are usually a little bit in the know. They know somebody that's done it, or they're in the sector.
Yeah, that's interesting too. Well, I think the series that you're running through Skills Education, Deb, is raising the profile and raising the awareness of RPL. So that's a good thing.
Well, it is. I was just been on the project advisory committee for NCVER, and the Commonwealth commissioned a study on very recently, and hopefully the report's out soon, on the current use of RPL across the country. How is it used? What industries is it used? What AQF level? As a contributor towards that, I said, well, I would like to see the previous education level of people that take it up, because it's a social justice mechanism. It brings people into the formal education sector that have a fear or have actively avoided the formal education system. And so we set it up. Yeah, we set it up so that it allows for people that the second chance learners. It allows for them to get an education, get a qualification. But unfortunately, the largest amount of people that take up RPL have already Cert 3 and above. So we've missed out. We've missed engaging those ones that need it the most.
Well, I suspect that this might be the start of a campaign trail for you, Deb. So we're just coming up to time. I'm going to put out a last shout out for anyone who has questions of Deb or commentary about some of the issues that were discussed in today's session. And if you've got those, just drop them into the chat. As I remind you all that after the session, you'll get the recording for today. So you'll be able to log into the Better portal and watch the recording again. And also that email asking for your feedback will come through, and that's what's going to trigger your PD record. So I very much appreciate everybody taking the time to join us with the live session today. It's always an opportunity to ask questions as the content is being presented. And definitely, Deb, it's always a pleasure to have you on and to hear about this area, not only that you're so experienced in, but have such a passion for. So again, thank you very much. It doesn't look like anything else is coming through. So it looks like
Michelle, just a quick shout out for those expert RPL practitioners, those are the ones that are in the field and they have the applied knowledge. I welcome you to come as a guest in the future webinars, which can be accessed on the website there.
We've
contact me through LinkedIn, email, or through that website.
Yeah, I put into the chat a little bit earlier your LinkedIn link. So anyone who isn't already connected with Deb on LinkedIn, jump in there, and I'll pop into the chat just now the next two sessions. So we've got part 3 and part 4 coming up, plus also the 10 webinar bundle. So that's an opportunity to jump in and see what's coming up in terms of the expose, if you like, the 10 session series all around RPL. So very
social learning one, actually, I've already we have a guest from Canada who is he's a pedagogical advisor for RPL for the college that he works with, and we also have scouts coming along.
Oh,
so
Well, but we'll be prepared for that, won't we? Boom tish. Okay. On that note,
guys.
Thanks again. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Oh, sorry, just before you go, quick one. I just noticed it before we shut off the recording. Ronald's saying, Lisa mentioned to do a skills audit rather than a skills checklist. What's the question? So the difference there?
It's just the approach. It is just the approach. So from my research, the some really, really good assessors said there's a collegial partnership when you approach it as a skills audit, rather than the dynamic of I'm the assessor and you prove that to me. It is really just the approach. It's in a human resource management context. Let's look at your career, where you're going, where's your gaps. So not only what you do have, but what you need to get further in your career. So it's really just the approach.
Yeah. I've just popped your email into the chat as well. So if there's any further question around how to implement that approach, they'll be welcome to reach out on email to you, Deb.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. I'll see you on the 26th. That's our next time we get together to talk RPL.
Look forward to it, guys. See you.
Okay. Bye. Thanks again, Deb. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.